Chapter 6 of Canadian Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Canadian Fairy Tales by Cyrus Macmillan. Rabbit and the Indian Chief. Long ago an Indian chief was living with his people far in the Canadian forest. Life was good, and food was plentiful, and the people were all very happy. But one day a wicked giant and his old witch wife came crashing into the land from a far country beyond the prairies. They devoured all the food they could lay their hands on, and soon there was little left to eat in all the country, and often they carried off little children to their hiding place and ate them up until not a trace of them remained. Somewhere far in the forest they dwelt in a hidden cave. They slept all day long, but at night they always stalked forth in search of plunder. The chief was much troubled, and with his warriors he tried in every way to discover their hiding place, but no one ever succeeded in finding it. For by the use of their magic power the giant and his old witch wife could make themselves invisible when they walked abroad among men, and they could not be caught. The chief called all his warriors to a council, and he said, "Who can rid me of this pest? Who can kill the giant?" But not a man replied. And when he saw his people's store of food rapidly growing smaller and the little children of his tribe slowly disappearing, he was greatly puzzled as to what he should do. One night of bright moonlight, Rabbit was prowling through the woods, as was his custom, in search of someone on whom he could play a prank, for he was a great joker. Suddenly he came upon the giant and his old witch wife standing by an opening in the side of a low mountain. He watched them for a long time from the shadow of a great tree, and at last he saw them enter a large hole in the side of the hill. He knew now that he had hit by accident upon the giant's cave, and he was well pleased by his discovery. But he kept his secret to himself, for he thought, "Here is a good chance for me to win fame. I will kill the giants by a crafty trick, and I will then be looked upon as a great warrior, the foremost in all the land, for all the chief's men have failed to find the giants." So he went to the chief and said, "O chief, I know where the giants live, and I swear to you that I am going to kill them. It is I alone who can rid you of these pests." "You," said the chief in great surprise, "little harm the like of you can do to giants. They will eat you up in one mouthful." And he laughed loudly at Rabbit's boldness. And he called to his warriors, saying, "See what a stout fighter we have here. Little Rabbit says he can do what we have failed to do. He swears that he will kill the giants. He is better fitted to kill a mouse." And they all laughed loud haw-haws at Rabbit's vanity. Poor Rabbit's pride was deeply hurt by the chief's scorn and the warriors' cruel laughter, but it made him all the more determined than ever to slay the thieving giants. So he went to an old woman who lived nearby and said, "Give me an old faded dress, and a ragged old shawl, and your colored spectacles, and a hat with a feather in it." The old woman wondered what tricks he was up to now, but she gave him what he asked for. He put on the tattered old dress and the battered old hat with a red feather sticking from the top, and he wrapped the old shawl about his face, and he wore the woman's colored spectacles, and he carried a crooked stick. And dressed in this fashion, he set out towards evening for the giant's home. When he reached the mouth of the cave, he stood still and waited, leaning on his crooked stick, for night was coming on, and he knew that the giants would soon be going out on their plundering rounds. After a time, when it was quite dark except for the moonlight, the giant's old witch wife came out of the cave. When she saw Rabbit in the dim light, she said gruffly, "Who are you, standing there in the shadows?" "Oh, my dear niece," said Rabbit, "I have found you at last. I am your poor old aunt. I thought I had lost my way. I have come to see you from your home in the far country. It was a long journey, and my poor old legs and back are stiff and sore, and I am very hungry and tired." And he moved slowly towards the woman, hobbling along with his crooked stick. The giant woman was deceived, and she threw her arms around Rabbit and kissed him. And she did not feel his whiskers or his split lip because of the old shawl that was wrapped around his face. "I have a pain in my jaw from sleeping out of doors," said Rabbit, "and I must keep my face wrapped up." "Come in and rest, and you will soon feel better," said the giant woman. "You will have to lead me in," said Rabbit, not wishing to take off the shawl, "for my eyesight is very bad." So she led Rabbit into the warm cave, which was so dark they could scarcely see each other, and she called her husband and said, "Here is my dear old aunt, who has come all the way from the far country beyond the prairies." And the giant, believing Rabbit to be his wife's kindred, for he could not see him very clearly, treated him very kindly, and they showed him the bed where he was to sleep. The woman then gave Rabbit a large piece of dried meat to eat, but Rabbit said, "I cannot eat it, for I am old and I have lost all my teeth. Give me an axe to cut it up small." So the woman brought him a sharp axe, and he chopped the meat into small pieces and ate it all up. And he said, "I will keep the axe by me, for I shall need it at all my meals." And he placed it beside his bed. The giant said, "We are going away to see some friends, but we shall be back before midnight." But before they went away, Rabbit said to the woman, "I hope your husband sleeps soundly. I have a bad cough, and I sometimes moan because of the pain in my face and head, and do not wish to disturb him." And the old giant woman answered, "He slumbers too well. When we sleep, we both snore loudly, and when you hear us snoring, you may cough as much as you please, for then you will know that we are sound asleep." And then the man and his witch wife went away. When the giants came home, Rabbit pretended to be fast asleep. They brought back with them much food which they hid in a secret place at the side of the cave. Rabbit watched them through the holes in the old shawl around his head. Soon they went to bed, drowsy after their fat meal. When Rabbit heard them snoring loudly like a great waterfall, chirr, chirr, he arose very quietly and crept softly to their bedside. With 2 blows of his axe he killed the giant and his wife, one after the other. Then he ran away as fast as he could, carrying with him his old dress and hat and shawl, for he thought he might need them again. In the morning he went to the chief's house and told the chief what he had done. The chief laughed scornfully, and he would not believe it until Rabbit brought him to the cave and showed him the slain giants, cold and stiff in their bed. The chief's men then took back to the village the great store of food the giants had hidden in the secret place. But the chief and his warriors, although they were glad to be rid of the thieves, were angry at heart, because Rabbit, whom they had laughed at, had done what they had failed to do, for they were very jealous of Rabbit's power. One day soon afterwards, the chief called all the birds and the animals to a council, and he said, "Now that the giants who robbed us of our food are dead and gone, and that we shall never again want for nourishment in my country, I am going to let each animal and bird choose the kind of food he would most like to live on if he could get it, and they shall never want for that kind of food if it can be provided." And he called on each to make the choice. And the birds said, "Grain and seeds and worms." And the squirrel said, "Nuts." And the fox said, "Chickens." And the cat said, "Milk." And the dog said, "Meat and bones." And the weasel said, "Eggs." And the wolf said, "Lambs." And the bear said, "Fish from the frozen sea," and so on until each animal was called upon and declared his liking. And the chief said, "It shall be as you have chosen." But the chief had purposely neglected to summon poor Rabbit to the council, and Rabbit was absent on a long journey. When he came home, he was very angry when he heard what had happened, for only the leftover in the world's food remained for him to choose. So he went to the chief and said in great wrath, "This is a fine return for ridding your land of giants, but that is a way you have. You always reward good deeds with evil." The chief was very angry because of Rabbit's insolence, and he said, "You are telling lies again." But Rabbit called as witnesses to the truth of what he said sheep and goat and duck, who chanced to be passing by and who stood listening to the quarrel. And old Sheep said, "Rabbit has spoken truly. When I was young, I gave the chief much wool to make clothes for his back, and he used me well. But now that I am old, he is going to kill me and eat me up. That is my reward." An old goat said, "Rabbit has spoken wisely and justly. I served the chief well in my time and gave him milk. But now that I am old and have no more milk, he is fattening me and getting me ready for slaughter. That is my reward." An old duck said, "That is a true saying of Rabbit. Once upon a time I gave the chief many eggs and young ducklings, but now that I have stopped laying, he is soon going to roast me in a pot. That is my reward." The chief could make no answer to these charges, for he knew them to be true, and he offered to do what was in his power for Rabbit. But Rabbit refused to make choice of food, for he said the best was already gone. He sulked for many months and lived alone by his own efforts as best he could. At last he decided to take vengeance on the chief, and he hit, as was his custom, on a crafty trick. The chief had an old bear which he prized very highly, for the bear did for him many wondrous tricks and brought laughter to him and his warriors when he danced at their feasts. In those olden times Bear had a long bushy tail of which he was very proud. One day as Rabbit sat on the ice fishing, for it was now winter, Bear came along. There was to be a feast that night, and he was going to dance for the chief, and he was in very good spirits. "Where did you get all the fine fish?" he asked, for he was a great fish eater. "I caught them through the hole in the ice," said Rabbit. "It is very easy. Just drop your tail down through the hole, and it will soon be covered with fine big fish." Bear did as he was told, and he sat on the ice for a long time waiting for his prey. He sat so long that the hole froze up, for it was very cold, and in it was frozen poor Bear's long bushy tail. "Now," said Rabbit, "jump quick, for many fish are hanging to you." Bear jumped up with all his might, but his tail was held fast in the ice and it broke off close to the root. Rabbit laughed in great glee and ran away, and poor Bear howled with pain and shame. He could not dance at the feast because his stub of a tail was sore, and the chief and the warriors were very angry at Rabbit because he had harmed their dancing pet. And since that time Bear has had a short stubby tail which to this day he tries to wag feebly. Rabbit then hid for many days far from the chief and his warriors. Then he decided to try another trick. The chief's woodcutter was old Beaver, who lived in a little house of reeds on the bank of a stream. He was very busy now cutting down trees for the chief, for it was near to springtime and the people were in need of logs for building roads over the rivers. One day Rabbit went to Beaver and said, "The chief sent me to you to bring you to a great tree he wishes you to cut down at once." So Beaver went along with him. But when Beaver was busy at his task cutting down the tree, Rabbit hit him a savage blow on the head with a big stick, hoping to kill him and thus again to anger the chief. Poor Beaver fell to the ground and Rabbit ran away. But Beaver was only stunned. He got up after a time and went home muttering to himself and rubbing his sore head. Soon Rabbit came back to the tree and found Beaver gone. He knew that his blow had failed. Then he put on again his tattered old dress and his ragged shawl and his colored spectacles and the hat with the red feathers sticking to the top, and he went to Beaver's house by the stream, hobbling along with a stick. "The chief sent me to you to bring you to a great tree he wishes you to cut down at once," he called. And Beaver said, "I have already tried to cut a great tree for him today, and I should have finished it had I not been beaten with a stick until I was stunned by the blow." "Who struck you?" asked Rabbit, laughing to himself. "Rabbit struck me," answered Beaver. "He is a great brigand and a liar and a thief," said Rabbit. "He is all that," said Beaver, rubbing the lump on his head. So Beaver went along with Rabbit, and Rabbit asked as they went along, "How is it that you are alive after that cruel blow?" And Beaver said, "Rabbit hit me on the head. If he had hit me on the back of my neck, he would have killed me, for there I keep the secret of my life." When Beaver was busy again at his task cutting down the tree, Rabbit hit him a powerful blow on the back of the neck, and poor Beaver fell down dead. Then he cut off his tail that was made like a file, and went away happy, for he knew that the chief would be very angry when he found what had happened to his woodcutter. When the chief learned that Beaver had been killed, his wrath knew no bounds, for he could ill afford at this time to lose his best wood chopper. He blamed Rabbit for the deed, but he could not be sure that his suspicions were well founded. Rabbit kept out of the chief's sight for some weeks, but one day in early summer he was very hungry. He saw all the other animals filling their bellies with their favorite food, and he decided to forget his sulks and to ask the chief for help. So he went to the chief and said haughtily, "I want you to give me food for my own special use, as you have done with the other animals. You must do it at once, or I will do you much harm." Then the chief remembered what Rabbit had done to his dancing bear, and he thought of the death of Beaver, for which he blamed Rabbit without proof, and he grew red with anger. He seized Rabbit by the heels and said, "Henceforth the dogs will always chase you, and you will never have peace when they are near. And you will live for the most part on whatever food I throw you into now." Then he whirled Rabbit around his head by the heels, and he threw him from him with great force, hoping to drop him in a great black swamp nearby. Poor Rabbit went flying through the air for a great distance, farther than the chief had hoped, and he dropped with a thud into a field of clover on the edge of which cabbages and lettuce were growing. And since that time the dogs have always chased Rabbit, and he has lived for the most part on cabbages and lettuce and clover which he steals on moonlight nights from farmers' fields. End of Rabbit and the Indian Chief.
Chapter 7 of Canadian Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Delphinium. Canadian Fairy Tales by Cyrus Macmillan. Great Heart and the Three Tests. Somewhere near the sea, in olden times, a boy was living with his father and mother. He had no brothers or sisters. His father was a great hunter, and the boy inherited something of his power, for he was always very successful in the killing of game. And his mother said, "Some day he will be a great man, for before his birth a vision came to me in the night, and told me that my son would win wide fame, and fairy gifts were laid by the fairies in his cradle." And his father, listening to her boasting, said, time will tell, but if he is to be a great man, it is his own deeds and not your boasting that must prove it." As the boy grew up, he became strangely beautiful, and he had great strength. And his father said, "It is time he set out to seek his fortune. I was in the forest doing for myself when I was no older than he." And his mother said, "Wait a little, and be not so impatient. He is yet young, and there is yet much time." So the boy remained at home a while longer. Now it happened that far away in a distant village there lived a young girl of very great beauty and grace. Her father had been a great chief, but he was now dead. Her mother too was dead, and she was all alone in the world. But her parents had left her vast lands, and a great store of goods, and many servants. And because of her treasures, and her great beauty, she had many suitors. But she was not easily pleased by men, and on all who came to seek her hand, she imposed severe feats of skill to test their sincerity and their worth. She was carefully guarded by an old woman, and many servants who kept troublesome and meddlesome people away. Soon the fame of the girl's wealth and beauty spread through all the land. It reached the sea-coast village where the young man dwelt. His father thought to himself, "Here is a good chance for my son to prove his worth." So he called his boy to him and said, "It is time you were setting out to seek your fortune in the world and to find a wife, for your springtime is passing, and your summer of life will soon be here, and before you know it, your autumn will be upon you, and your winter will be near. There is no time to lose. Seek out the beautiful girl of the rich treasures in the distant inland village, and try to win her as your wife." And his mother gave him the fairy gifts which had been laid in his cradle at his birth, and he said good-bye to his parents, and set out on his long journey. He had no misgivings, for he was very vain of his beauty, and he was sure, too, of his strength. As he travelled inland, he came one day upon a man, clad in scarlet, sitting on the side of a rocky hill, tying stones to his feet. "Hello," he said to the man. "Why are you tying these heavy rocks to your ankles?" "I am a hunter," replied the man. "But when I follow the deer I run so fast that I am soon far in front of them instead of behind them, and I am putting heavy weights on my feet so that I will not run so rapidly." "You are indeed a wonderful man," said the boy. "But I am alone, and I need a companion. Let us go along together." "Who are you?" said the man. "I am Lad of the Great Heart," said the boy, "and I can do great deeds, and I can win for you great treasure." So the Scarlet Runner went along with him. Towards evening, when they were now far inland, they came to a large lake. Among the trees on the fringe of the lake, a large fat man was lying flat on his stomach, with his mouth in the water, drinking as hard as he could. For some time they watched him, but still he drank, and the lake grew smaller and smaller, and still his thirst was not quenched. They laughed at such a strange sight, and as they approached him the boy said, "Hello, why do you lie there drinking so much water?" "Oh," answered the fat man, "there are times when I cannot get enough water to drink. When I have drunk this lake dry, I shall still be thirsty." "Who are you?" asked the boy. "I am Man of the Great Thirst," said the fat man. "That is well," said Great Heart. "We too need a third companion. We can do great deeds, and we can win for you great treasure." So the three went along together. They had not gone far when they came to a wide open plain, where they saw a man walking along with his face raised upwards, peering at the sky. He moved along rapidly and seemed to find his way without his eyes, for he gazed steadily at the heavens. "Hello," said Great Heart as the sky gazer rushed past him and almost knocked him over. "What are you looking at so intently?" "Oh," said the man, "I have shot an arrow into the sky, and I am waiting for it to fall. It has gone so far that it will be some time before it drops." "Who are you?" asked the boy. "I am the Far Darter," said the sky gazer. "We three need a fourth companion," said the boy. "We can do great deeds and win for you much treasure. Come along with us." So the four went along together. They had gone but a short distance across the plain to the edge of a forest, when they came upon a man lying down at full length with his head upon his hand. The edge of his hand was on the ground, and it was half closed around his ear, which rested upon it. As he saw the four men approaching him, he placed a finger of his other hand upon his lips and signalled to them to keep quiet. "Hello," said Great Heart in a whisper. "What are you doing there with your ear to the ground?" "I am listening to the plants growing far away in the forest," he answered. "There is a beautiful flower I wish to find, and I am trying to hear it breathing so that I may go and get it. Aha! I hear it now." So saying, he rose from the ground. The boy said, "Who are you?" "I am Keen Ears," said the listener. "We four need another companion," said Great Heart. "We can do great deeds and win for you much treasure. Come along with us." So the four men and the boy went along together, Keen Ears, and Scarlet Runner, and Far Darter, and Man of the Great Thirst, and Lad of the Great Heart. Then Great Heart unfolded to the others his plan to win the beautiful girl who lived with her treasures in the distant village, and they gladly agreed to help him in his dangerous undertaking. When they reached the village, the people were all very curious when they saw the 5 strangers. They marvelled at Great Heart's beauty, but when they heard that he wished to marry the daughter of the former chief, they shook their heads gravely and said, "It will never be. She places hard conditions on all who seek her hand. He who fails in the tests is doomed to death. Many suitors have tried and failed and died." But Great Heart was not alarmed, and with his 4 companions he went to the girl's home. The old woman who guarded her met him at the door, and he made known his wishes. She laughed scornfully when she saw his great beauty, and she said, "You look more like a girl than like a warrior. You cannot endure the tests." But the young man insisted on making the trials. The old woman said, "If you fail in the tests, you will die." And Great Heart said, "It is so agreed." Then the woman said, If you wish to win the maiden, you must first push away this great rock from before her window. It keeps the sunlight from her in the mornings." Then Greatheart, calling to his aid the fairy gifts of his cradle, placed his shoulder against the huge stone which rose higher than the house, and he pushed with all his strength. With a mighty crash, it rolled down the hill and broke into millions of pieces. The bits of rock flew all over the earth, so great was the fall, and the little pebbles and stones that came from it are seen throughout the world to this day. The sunlight streamed in at the window, and the maiden knew that the first test had been successfully passed by a suitor. Then came the second test. The old woman and her servants brought great quantities of food and drink, and bade the strangers consume it all at one meal. They were very hungry, for they had eaten nothing all day, and they easily ate up the food. But when Greatheart saw the great barrels of water, his spirits sank, and he said, "I fear I am beaten." But Man of the Great Thirst said, "Not so fast, my friend. The spell of great stomach burning is again upon me. I am very dry, as if there was a fire in my belly. Give me a chance to drink." He went from barrel to barrel, and in a twinkling he had drained them all of every drop. And the people wondered greatly. But there was still another test. "You must have one of your party run a race," said the old woman to Greatheart, and she brought out a man who had never been beaten in running. "Who is your choice of runners?" she asked. "He must race with this man, and if he wins, you may have the maiden for your wife and all the treasure with her, for this is the final test. But if he loses the race, you shall die." Greatheart called Scarlet Runner to the mark and told the old woman that this was the man selected. Then he untied the rocks from the runner's feet, and when all was ready, the race began. The course lay far across the plains for many miles, until the runners should pass from sight, and back again to the starting point. The two runners kept together for some distance, talking together in a friendly way as they ran. When they had passed from sight of the village, the maiden's runner said, "Now we are out of sight of the village. Let us rest here a while on this grassy bank, for the day is hot." The Scarlet Runner agreed to this, and they both stretched out on the grass. Now this was an old trick of the maiden's runner, who always won by craft rather than by speed. They had not lain down long on the grass when Scarlet Runner fell asleep under the hot sun, just as his rival had hoped. When the latter was sure that his rival was sound asleep, he set out for the village, running as fast as he could. The people soon saw their runner approaching far off on the plains, but there was no sign of the stranger, and they thought that the new suitor for the girl's hand had at last failed, like all the others before him. Greatheart was much puzzled when Scarlet Runner did not appear, and as he saw the maiden's runner coming nearer, he said, "What could have happened? I fear I am beaten." But Keen Ears threw himself flat on the ground and listened. "Scarlet Runner is asleep," he called. "I hear him snoring on the plains, far away." And with his keen sense of sound, he located the exact spot where the runner was lying. "I will soon wake him," said Far Darter, as he fitted an arrow to his bowstring. The people all thought him mad, for they had never seen an arrow shot so great a distance beyond their sight. But Far Darter was not dismayed. He quickly shot an arrow from his bow to the spot which Keen Ears had indicated. His aim was so true that the arrow hit Scarlet Runner on the nose and aroused him from his sleep. But when he rose to his feet, he found that his rival was gone, and he knew that he had been deceived. So in a great rage, because of the trick and the pain in his nose, he set out for the village, running like the wind. His rival had almost reached the end of the race, but by putting all his strength into his effort, Scarlet Runner quickly overtook him and passed him near the winning post and won the race. And the people wondered greatly at these great deeds of the strangers. Then the old woman said to Greatheart, "You have won the maiden as your wife, for you alone have succeeded in these tests." So the two were married with great ceremony. Greatheart gave much treasure to his companions, and they promised to help him always in his need. Then, with his wife and her servants, and a great store of goods, he went back to his native village by the sea. His father and mother were glad to see him again and to hear of his success. And his mother said, "I told you he would win great fame because of the fairy gifts that were laid in his cradle at his birth." And they all lived together and were henceforth very happy. End of Greatheart and the Three Tests. Recording by Delphinium.
Chapter 8 of Canadian Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Betty B. Canadian Fairy Tales by Cyrus McMillan. The Boy of the Red Twilight Sky. Long ago there dwelt on the shores of the great water in the west a young man and his younger wife. They had no children, and they lived all by themselves, far from other people on an island not far from the coast. The man spent his time in catching the deep-sea fish far out on the ocean, or in spearing salmon in the distant rivers. Often he was gone for many days, and his wife was very lonely in his absence. She was not afraid, for she had a stout spirit, but it was very dismal in the evenings to look only at the gray, leaden sky and to hear only the sound of the surf as it beat upon the beach. So day after day she said to herself, "I wish we had children. They would be good company for me when I am alone and my husband is far away." One evening at twilight, when she was solitary because of her husband's absence on the ocean, catching the deep-sea fish, she sat on the sand beach, looking out across the water. The sky in the west was pale gray. It was always dull and gray in that country, and when the sun had gone down there was no soft light. In her loneliness the woman said to herself, "I wish we had children to keep me company." A kingfisher, with his children, was diving for minnows not far away, and the woman said, "Oh, seabird with the white collar, I wish we had children like you." And the kingfisher said, "Look in the seashells, look in the seashells," and flew away. The next evening the woman sat again upon the beach, looking westward at the dull gray sky. Not far away a white seagull was riding on the waves in the midst of her brood of little ones. And the woman said, "Oh, white seabird, I wish we had children like you to keep us company." And the seagull said, "Look in the seashells, look in the seashells," and flew away. The woman wondered greatly at the words of the kingfisher and the seagull. As she sat there and thought, she heard a strange cry coming from the sand dunes behind her. She went closer to the sound and found that the cry came from a large seashell lying on the sand. She picked up the shell, and inside of it was a tiny boy, crying as hard as he could. She was well pleased with her discovery, and she carried the baby to her home and cared for him. When her husband came home from the sea, he too was very happy to find the baby there, for he knew that they would be lonely no more. The baby grew very rapidly, and soon he was able to walk and move about where he pleased. One day the woman was wearing a copper bracelet on her arm, and the child said to her, "I must have a bow made from the copper on your arm." So to please him she made a tiny bow from the bracelet and 2 tiny arrows. At once he set out to hunt game, and day after day he came home bearing the products of his chase. He brought home geese and ducks and brant and small seabirds, and gave them to his mother for food. As he grew older, the man and his wife noticed that his face took on a golden hue, brighter than the color of his copper bow. Wherever he went there was a strange light. When he sat on the beach looking to the west, the weather was always calm, and there were strange bright gleams upon the water. And his foster parents wondered greatly at this unusual power. But the boy would not talk about it. When they spoke of it, he was always silent. It happened once that the winds blew hard over the great water, and the man could not go out to catch fish because of the turbulent sea. For many days he stayed on shore, for the ocean, which was usually at peace, was lashed into a great fury, and the waves were dashing high on the beach. Soon the people were in need of fish for food, and the boy said, "I will go out with you, for I can overcome the storm's spirit." The man did not want to go, but at last he listened to the boy's entreaties and together they set out for the fishing grounds far across the tossing sea. They had not gone far when they met the spirit of the storm, coming madly from the southwest, where the great winds dwelt. He tried hard to upset their boat, but over them he had no power, for the boy guided the frail craft across the water, and all around them the sea was calm and still. Then the storm spirit called his nephew Black Cloud to help him, and away in the southeast they saw him hurrying to his uncle's aid. But the boy said to the man, "Be not afraid, for I am more than a match for him." So the two met, but when Black Cloud saw the boy, he quickly disappeared. Then the spirit of the storm called Mist of the Sea to come and cover the water, for he thought the boat would be lost if he hid the land from the man and the boy. When the man saw Mist of the Sea coming like a gray vapor across the water, he was very frightened, for of all his enemies on the ocean he feared this one most. But the boy said, "He cannot harm you when I am with you." And sure enough, when Mist of the Sea saw the boy sitting smiling in the boat, he disappeared as quickly as he had come. And the storm spirit in great anger hurried away to other parts, and that day there was no more danger on the sea near the fishing grounds. The boy and the man soon reached the fishing grounds in safety, and the boy taught his foster father a magic song with which he was able to lure fish to his nets. Before evening came, the boat was filled with good fat fish, and they set out for their home. The man said, "Tell me the secret of your power." But the boy said, "It is not yet time." The next day the boy killed many birds. He skinned them all and dried their skins. Then he dressed himself in the skin of a plover, and rose into the air and flew above the sea. And the sea under him was gray like his wings. Then he came down and dressed himself in the skin of a blue jay, and soared away again. And the sea over which he was flying was at once changed to blue, like the blue of his wings. When he came back to the beach, he put on the skin of a robin with the breast of a golden hue, like his face. Then he flew high, and at once the waves under him reflected a color as of fire, and bright gleams of light appeared upon the ocean. And the sky in the west was golden red. The boy flew back to the beach, and he said to his foster parents, "Now it is time for me to leave you. I am the offspring of the sun. Yesterday my power was tested, and it was not found wanting. So now I must go away, and I shall see you no more. But at evening I shall appear to you often in the twilight sky in the west. And when the sky and the sea look at evening like the color of my face, you will know that there will be no wind nor storm, and that on the morrow the weather will be fair. But although I go away, I shall leave you a strange power. And always when you need me, let me know your desires by making white offerings to me, so that I may see them from my home far in the west." Then he gave to his foster mother a wonderful robe. He bade his parents goodbye and soared away to the west, leaving them in sadness. But the woman still keeps a part of the power he gave her, and when she sits on the island in a crevice in the dunes and loosens her wonderful robe, the wind hurries down from the land, and the sea is ruffled with storm. And the more she loosens the garment, the greater is the tempest. But in the late autumn, when the cold mists come in from the sea, and the evenings are chill, and the sky is dull and gray, she remembers the promise of the boy, and she makes to him an offering of tiny white feathers, plucked from the breasts of birds. She throws them into the air, and they appear as flakes of snow and rise thickly into the winds. And they hurry westward to tell the boy that the world is gray and dreary as it yearns for the sight of his golden face. Then he appears to the people of earth. He comes at evening and lingers after the sun has gone, until the twilight sky is red and the ocean in the west has gleams of golden light. And the people then know that there will be no wind, and that on the morrow the weather will be fair, as he promised them long ago. End of Chapter 8.
Chapter 9 of Canadian Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Shelley Tumbleson of Bellingham, Washington, and at shelleytumbleson.com. Canadian Fairy Tales by Cyrus Macmillan. How Raven Brought Fire to the Indians. Many ages ago, when the world was still young, Raven and White Seagull lived near together in Canada, far in the North Country on the shores of the Great Water in the West. They were very good friends, and they always worked in harmony, and they had much food and many servants in common. White Seagull knew no guile. He was always very open and frank and honest in his dealings with others, but Raven was a sly fellow, and at times he was not lacking in treachery and deceit. But Seagull did not suspect him, and the two lived always on very friendly terms. In these far-back times in the North Country, all the world was dark, and there was no light but that of the stars. Seagull owned all the daylight, but he was very stingy, and he kept it always locked up in a box. He would give none of it to anyone else, and he never let it out of the box except when he needed a little of it to help himself when he went far away on his journeys. After a time, Raven grew envious of Seagull's possession, and he said, "It is not fair that Seagull should keep the daylight all to himself, locked up in a box. It was meant for all the world, and not for him alone, and it would be of great value to all of us if he would sometimes let a little of it out." So he went to Seagull and said, "Give me some of your daylight. You do not need all of it, and I can use some of it with advantage." But Seagull said, "No, I want it all for myself. What could you do with the daylight, you with your coat as black as night?" And he would not give him any of it. So Raven made up his mind that he would have to get some daylight from Seagull by stealth. Soon afterwards, Raven gathered some prickly thorns and burdocks and scattered them on the ground between Seagull's house and the beach where the canoes were lying. Then he went to Seagull's window and cried loudly, "Our canoes are going adrift in the surf. Come, quickly, and help me save them." Seagull sprang out of bed and ran half asleep on his bare feet, but as he ran to the beach, the thorns stuck in his bare flesh, and he howled with pain. He crawled back to his house, saying, "My canoe may go adrift if it pleases. I cannot walk because of the splinters in my feet." Raven chuckled to himself, and he moved away, pretending to go to the beach to draw up the canoes. Then he went into Seagull's house. Seagull was still howling with pain. He was sitting, crying on the side of his bed, and he was trying to pull the thorns from the feet as best he could. "I will help you," said Raven, "for I have often done this before. I'm a very good doctor." So he took an awl made from whalebone, and he caught hold of Seagull's foot with the pretense of removing the thorns. But instead of taking them out, he only pushed them in farther until poor Seagull howled louder than ever. And Raven said, "It is so dark, I cannot see to pull these thorns from your feet. Give me some daylight, and I will soon cure you. A doctor must always have a little light." So Seagull unlocked the box and lifted the cover just a little bit so that a faint gleam of light came out. "That is better," said Raven. But instead of picking out the thorns, he pushed them in as he had done before, until Seagull howled and kicked in pain. "Why are you so stingy with your light?" snapped Raven. "Do you think I am an owl and that I can see well enough in the darkness to heal your feet? Open the box wide, and I will soon make you well." So saying, he purposefully fell heavily against Seagull and knocked the box on the floor. The cover flew open, and daylight escaped and spread quickly all over the world. Poor Seagull tried his best to lure it back again into the box, but his efforts proved fruitless, for it had gone forever. Raven said he was very sorry for the accident, but after he had taken all the thorns from Seagull's feet, he went home laughing to himself, and well pleased because of the success of his trick. Soon there was light in all the world, but Raven could not see very well, for the light was too bright, and his eyes were not accustomed to it. He sat for a long time looking towards the east, but he saw there nothing of interest. The next day he saw a bit farther, for he was now getting used to the new conditions. The third day he could see distinctly a line of hills far in the east rising against the sky and covered with a blue mist. He looked long at the strange sight. Then he saw far away towards the hill a thin column of smoke lifting heavenwards. He had never seen smoke before, but he had often heard of it from travelers in strange places. "That must be the country of which I have been told," he said. In that land dwell the people who alone possess fire. We have searched for it for many ages, and now I think we have found it." Then he thought, "We now have the daylight, and what a fine thing it would be if we could also have fire." And then he determined to set out to find it. On the following day he called his servants together and told them of his plans. He said, "We shall set out at once, for the distance is far." And he asked 3 of his best servants, Robin, Mole, and Flea, to go with him. Flea brought out his little wagon, and they all tried to get into it, but it was much too small to hold them. Then they tried Mole's carriage, but it was much too frail, and it had scarcely started to move when it broke down, and they all fell out in a heap. Then they tried Robin's carriage, but it was much too high, and it toppled over under its heavy load and threw them all to the ground. Then Raven stole Seagull's large stone carriage, for Seagull was asleep, and it did very well, and they started on their journey, taking turns pushing the carriage along with a pole over the flat plain. After a strange journey in queer places, they reached the land of the people who owned fire, guided along by the thin column of smoke. The people were not people of earth. Some say they were the fish people, but that no man knows. They sat around in a large circle with fire in their midst, for it was autumn, and the days and nights were chill, and fire was in many places. Raven looked on for a while from afar, thinking of the best plan to obtain fire. Then he said to Robin, "You can move faster than any of us. You must steal fire. You can fly and quickly pick it up with your bill and take it back to us, and the people will not see nor hear you." So Robin picked out a spot where there were few people, and he darted in quickly and picked up fire in a twinkling and flew back unharmed towards his companions. But he had only taken a very little bit of it. When he got halfway back to his friends, fire was so hot in his bill that it gave him a strange pain, and he had to drop it onto the ground. It fell to the earth with a crash, and it was so small that it flickered faintly. Robin called to his companions to bring the carriage. Then he stood over fire and fanned it with his wings to keep it alive. It was very hot, but he stood bravely to his task until his breast was badly scorched and he had to move away. His efforts to save fire were of no avail, and before his companions reached him, fire had died and only a black coal remained. And poor Robin's breast was singed, and to this day the breasts of his descendants are a reddish-brown color because he was scorched while trying to steal fire ages ago. Then Raven asked Flea to make the attempt to steal fire, but Flea said, "I am too little. The heat would roast me to death, and further, I might miscalculate the distance and hop into the flame." Then Raven asked Mole to try, but Mole said, "Oh no, I am better fitted for other work. My fur would be all singed like Robin's breast." Raven took good care that he would not go himself, for he was a great coward. So he said, "There is a better and easier way. We will steal the baby of the chief and hold him for ransom. Perhaps they will give us fire in exchange for him." And they all thought this was a very good idea. Raven asked, "Who will volunteer to steal the baby?" For he always made others do all the work. Flea said, "I will go. In one jump I will be in the house, and in another jump I will be out again, for I can hop a great distance." But the others laughed and said, "You could not carry the baby. You are too small." The Mole said, "I will go. I can tunnel a passage very quietly into the house and right up to the baby's cradle. I can then steal the baby and no one will hear or see me." So it was agreed that Mole should go. In a few minutes Mole made his tunnel, and he was soon back with the baby. Then they got into their carriage and hurried home with their prize. When the chief of the fire people discovered the loss of his child, he was very angry. And in all the land there was great sorrow because the chief's heir, the hope of the tribe, had gone. And the child's mother and her women wept so bitterly that their tears fell like rain on all the land. The chief said he would give anything he possessed to find his child, but although his people searched far and near, they could not find the baby. After many days, a wayfarer who had come far from the great water in the west brought them news that a strange child was living far to the westward in the village by the sea. He said, "He is not of their tribe. He looks like the children of your village," and he advised them to go see for themselves. So the chief sent his men to search for them, guided by the wayfarer. When they reached Raven's village, they were told that a strange baby was indeed there. The child was described to them, but he was kept out of sight, and Raven would not tell how he had happened to come there. And Raven said, "How do I know he's your chief's child? People tell strange lies these days. If you want him, you can pay for him, for he has caused us much trouble and expense." So the messengers went back and reported to the chief what they had heard. From the description, the chief knew that the child was his, so he gave the messengers very valuable presents of pearls and rich robes and sent them back again to ransom his boy. But Raven, when he saw the presents, said, "No, I do not want these gifts. They do not pay me for my trouble," and he would not part with the baby. The messengers again reported to the chief what had happened. Then the chief gave them still richer gifts, the best he had in all his land, and sent them back. But again Raven said, "No, your gifts are valueless compared with all my trouble and expense. Say this to your chief." When the chief heard this from his messengers, he was sore perplexed, for he had offered the best he had, and he thought that he had reached the end of his resources. So he said, "Go back and ask the people to demand what they wish in exchange for my boy, and they will receive it if it can be provided." So the messengers went back to Raven and spoke as they had been commanded, and Raven said, "Only one thing can pay for the child, and that is fire. Give me fire and you can take the baby." The messenger laughed and said, "Why did you not say so at the first and save us all this trouble and anxiety? Fire is the most plentiful thing in our kingdom, and we hold it in no value." So they returned happy to the chief, and he sent back much fire and received his child unharmed from Raven in exchange. And he sent Raven 2 small stones, which the messengers taught Raven how to use. And they said, "If you ever lose fire, or if it dies for lack of food, you can always call it back to life with these 2 little stones." Then they showed him how to make fire with the 2 little stones and withered grass and birch bark and dry pine, and Raven thought it was very easy. And he felt very proud because he had brought fire and light to the earth. He kept fire for himself for a long time, and although the people clamored loudly for it, he would not give any of it away. Soon, however, he decided to sell a quantity of it, for he now had the power of making it. So he said to himself, "This is a good way to get many wives." And he announced that he would only sell some of his fire in return for a wife. And many families bought his fire, and in exchange he received many wives. And to this day he still has many wives, and he still moves about from place to place with a flock of them always around him. But the Indians, when they arrived, took fire away from him. Thus fire came to the Indians in the olden days. And when it has died, as it often does, they still sometimes use raven flintstones to bring it back to life. End of How Raven Brought Fire to the Indians. Recording by Shelley Tumbleson of Bellingham, Washington. Also at shelleytumbleson.com.
Chapter 10 of Canadian Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Canadian Fairy Tales by Cyrus Macmillan. The Girl Who Always Cried. On the bank of a stream far in the west, Owl Man lived long ago in a little house under the ground. He had very strange habits. He always kept away from the great water, and he dwelt for the most part in the forest. He had very few friends, and he usually went hunting by himself. He lived on toads and frogs and flies. He would say but little, and when other people sat around talking pleasantly, he was always silent, gazing into space with wide open eyes, and trying to look wiser than he really was. Because of this, people thought he was very queer, and strange stories about him soon spread far and wide. It was said that he was very cruel, and that he was silent because he was always brooding over his past wickedness or thinking about some evil deed he was soon going to do. And when children were troublesome or disobedient, their mothers always frightened them into goodness by saying, "The Owl Man from the stream will come and take you if you do not mend your ways." And although the Owl Man was a solitary fellow, he thus had great influence in all the land. Not far away lived a man and a woman who had one adopted daughter. Because she was the only child in the house, she was much petted, and she was never satisfied, and she cried and fretted all the time, and kept always asking for things she could not get. She disturbed all the neighbors round about so that they could not sleep because of her constant wailing and complaining. At last her foster parents grew tired of her weeping, and they said, "The Owl Man will carry you off if you do not stop crying." But still she pouted and fretted, and the old man of the house said, "I wish the Owl Man would come and take her away." Now the old man was a great magician, and as he wished, so it came to pass. That evening it happened that the people were gathered at a feast of shellfish on the beach by the bright moonlight, as was their weekly custom. But the sorrowful girl would not go with the others. She stayed at home and sulked. As she sat alone in the house, old Owl Man came along carrying his basket full of toads and frogs. The girl was still crying when he came in. "I have come for you," he said, as the old man wished, and he put her in his basket with the toads and frogs and carried her off. She yelled and kicked and scratched, but the lid of the basket was tightly closed, and Owl Man laughed to himself and said, "Now I have a wife at last. I shall be alone no more, and the people will not now think I am so queer." So he took her to his underground house by the stream. That night the people noticed that the girl's cries were no longer heard, and they said, "What can have cured Sourface? What can have pleased Crybaby into silence?" And the girl's foster mother wondered where she had gone, but only the old man knew that it had happened as he had wished because of his magic power, and that Owl Man had taken her away. The girl was not happy in her new home, for she could not be happy in any place. She still kept up her caterwauling, and there was no peace in the house. Owl Man was a great hunter. Every day he went out hunting with his big basket on his arm, but always locked his wife in the house before he went away. He was always very successful in the chase, and each night he came back with his basket full of toads and frogs and field mice and flies. But his wife would eat none of them, and she threw them in his face when he offered them to her, and said in a bad temper, "I will not eat your filthy food. It is not fit food for gentlefolk." And Owl Man said, "Gentlefolk indeed! You should find a more suitable name. You are not gentle. You are a wild, evil thing. But I am going to tame you." And the girl wept again and sulked and stamped her feet in her temper. At last the girl became very hungry, for there was little to eat except the food that Owl Man brought home for himself. He gathered a few berries for her, but even these did not satisfy her hunger. So she thought out a plan of escape. One day when Owl Man was away, she took some oil she found in the house and rubbed it all over her face and hair. When Owl Man came home in the evening, he said, "You are very pretty tonight. What have you done to make yourself look so sleek and shiny?" And she answered, "I have put on my face and hair gum which I picked from the trees last night when I went walking with you." And he said, "I should like to put some on too, for perhaps it would make me beautiful." The girl told him that if he would go out and gather some gum, she would put it on his face and hair for him. So he went out and gathered a great store of gum from the trees and brought it back to her. She melted it on a hot stove until it was balsam again and would pour easily out. Then she said, "Shut your eyes so it will not harm your sight, and I will make your face and hair beautiful and shining like mine." Owl Man shut his eyes, and the girl soon covered his face and head with the soft gum. She put it on very thick, and she said, "Keep your eyes shut until it dries, or it may blind you." Owl Man did as he was told, but when the gum dried, he could not open his eyes, and while he was trying to rub it off, the girl slipped out the door and ran back to her parents, far away by the great water. Owl Man scraped the gum from his face and head as best he could, and when he could open his eyes again and could see pretty well, he went out into the night in search of his wife. And as he went along, he cried, "Oh, oh, oh, where is my wife? Where is my girl? I have lost my wife, I have lost my girl. Oh, oh, oh." And when the people heard him calling, they thought they would play a trick on him. So they said, "She is here, she is here." But when he entered their houses, the woman they showed him was not his wife, and he went away sorrowful. And the people all laughed at his confusion and said, "Owl Man is getting queerer each day. He is far gone in his head." Owl Man went from house to house, but he could not find his wife. Then he went to the trees and searched among the branches. He pulled the trees up by the roots, thinking she might be hiding underneath, and he looked into the salmon traps in the rivers and kicked them to pieces in his frenzy. but nowhere was his wife to be found. Then he went to the girl's house where she was hiding, and he yelled, "Oh, oh, oh, give me my wife! Give me my girl! I know she is here! Oh, oh, oh!" But the girl's foster mother would not give her up. Then he began to tear down the house over their heads, for the old man of the house was away, and there was no one else strong enough to stop Owlman in his rage. When the woman saw her house in danger of falling about her ears, she cried, "Stop! Your wife is here." And she brought forth the girl from her hiding place. When Owlman saw her, his rage left him, and he was happy again. But just then the old man of magic power came home. He had heard the hubbub from a distance. When he came in and saw the great holes in the roof and the side of his house where Owlman had torn away the logs, he was very angry, and he said to himself, "I will punish both Owlman and the girl for this night's work." And he hit upon a plan. He said to Owlman, "We must give you a hot bath to melt the gum and take it from your hair, for it will do you no good, and it will take all the hair off your head." And Owlman gladly agreed. So they filled a great bark tub with water and heated it by placing at the bottom of it many red-hot stones, after the fashion of Indians in those old days. But the old man put so many hot stones in the water that it was soon almost boiling with the heat. And when they put Owlman into the tub, he was almost scalded to death, and he yelled loudly in pain. Then the old man said, "Now I will take vengeance. You will trouble me no more. You have broken my house. Henceforth you will not be a man, but an owl, and you will dwell alone in the forest with few friends, and you will live always on frogs and toads and field mice, and people will hear you at night crying for your wife all over the land, but you shall never find her." Then, with his magic power, he changed him to an owl and sent him on his way. He said to the girl, "You have done me much harm too, and you have brought all this trouble upon me. Henceforth you will not be a girl, but a fishhawk, and you will always cry and fret and scream as you have done before, and you will never be satisfied." And with his magic power he changed her into a fishhawk and sent her out to the ocean. And there she screams always, and she is a great glutton, for she can never get enough to eat. And since that time owl and fishhawk have not dwelt together and have not been on friendly terms. They live far apart, and owl keeps to the forest and the mountains, while the other keeps to the sea. Thus was the old man avenged, and thus was the weeping maiden punished for her tears. And the cries of owl and fishhawk are still heard in many places, one calling for his wife, the other screaming unsatisfied for something she cannot get. End of The Girl Who Always Cried.